In 1902, 14 men set sail for Antarctic waters on the schooner Pelagia, searching for new whaling grounds and mapping depths untouched by civilization. They carried nautical charts in oiled cases, precision chronometers and barometers, but found a red glow in the water where there should have been no light, and a silence so complete that the ocean seemed dead. The tracks on the ice floes were wider than any known creature, and the temperature dropped in impossible leaps. What rose from that abyss left half the crew at the bottom, and the survivors recorded testimony that no chart or British Admiralty report could contain. So, before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. I was 26 years old when I stepped aboard the Pelagia in December 1901. The morning air on the pier at Macquarie Island cut into my face with a cold that my breath couldn't warm. The fog hung low, enveloping the masts of the ships in a milky veil through which only the outlines of the bows and the creaking of the rigging could be seen. The temperature barely rose above freezing, even though the sun was high in the sky. The polar day was beginning. The humidity soaked through our wool jackets in minutes, leaving a sticky dampness on our skin that even the south wind couldn't blow away. The Pelagia measured 63 feet from stem to stern, a sturdy bark schooner with 2 masts and square sails that gave it maneuverability among the ice. The hull was planked with 3-inch thick oak boards, tarred black, with copper sheathing below the waterline to protect against woodworm. On deck stood 2 whaling harpoons, small 4-inch ones with hand guides, not the steam cannons of the new era. We carried barrels of salted meat, rye biscuits, dried peas, molasses in ceramic jugs, water in oak barrels, tar for caulking, hemp ropes, spare sails and canvas, compasses, sextants, Swiss chronometers, barometers, mercury thermometers, a medical chest with iodine, quinine, and morphine. Lee Enfield rifles made in 1895 with cartridges in oiled boxes. Captain Edward Holloway stood on the starboard side with a pipe in his teeth, looking at the black, oily water lapping between the pier and the hull. He was 47 years old, his face weathered to leatheriness, with wrinkles around his eyes that never disappeared, even when he smiled. He had sailed in Antarctic waters for 23 years, first on British whalers, then on Norwegian trappers, and he kept charts in his head more accurately than most kept them on paper. Johan Christensen sat on the stanchion by the foremast, cleaning a whaling harpoon with a rag dipped in kerosene. He was 52 years old, originally from Bergen, and had spent 30 years in polar waters, first in Greenland, then in Antarctica. His hands were broad, with knotty joints and scars from lines that cut into his skin to the bone when a whale jerked on the gear. He wore a Norwegian sweater with reindeer on it and spoke English with a heavy accent that softened only when he switched to his native language. Henry Buxton, the first mate, checked the fastenings of the boats on the starboard side, jerking the halyards with sharp movements. He was 38 years old, wiry and tall, with a neat beard and a manner of speaking slowly, as if weighing each word. He had served on merchant ships for 12 years before moving on to research expeditions, and carried a small moleskin notebook in his pocket, where he recorded coordinates and weather observations twice a day. Boatswain William Grace stood by the mainmast, giving orders to 2 sailors who were securing the cargo nets. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered and taciturn, with hands that could bend iron bars and a gaze that stopped quarrels simply by being nearby. He read the Bible to the crew on Sundays, holding the book in his left hand and the railing with his right, even in calm weather, as if expecting the ship to rock. Dr. Alistair Finch came out of his cabin with a medical chest under his arm, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was 41 years old, a ship's doctor and amateur naturalist, a member of the Linnean Society, with a habit of looking at everything through a magnifying glass that hung on a chain around his neck. His fingers were long and thin, stained with ink from endless entries in the logbook where he recorded every specimen he found. The sailors worked in silence. Patrick O'Malley, a 29-year-old Irishman with a red beard and a habit of whistling tunes that no one knew. Lars Anderson, a 34-year-old Swede, silent and strong, who carried loads that 2 men could barely manage. John Turner, a 31-year-old Englishman, a former coal miner from the Yorkshire mines, his face always covered in soot from working in the furnace, although he was clean on deck. Charles Robinson, 29 years old, a sailor with a habit of checking knots twice and 3 times, even when the others had already moved on. Samuel Davis, 35, a ship's carpenter with an axe on his belt and a habit of whittling even when he was idle. Peter Holmes, 42, a cook with a red nose and an apron stained with grease and flour. William Brooks, 24, the youngest of the adults, with a sketchbook in which he drew the silhouettes of icebergs and the shapes of waves. The cabin boy, Jamie McAllister, ran between the rigging, handing out tools and carrying water. He was 16, thin and tall, with perpetually tousled hair and eyes that took everything in with the eagerness of youth. This was his first voyage to polar waters, although he had already spent a year sailing on coastal vessels along Scotland. We set sail on the 28th of December, 1901, with the tide, when the water rose high enough for the schooner to easily slip off the shoal. The wind blew from the northwest, light and steady, filling the sails without gusts. The direction was southeast, into the open waters of the Southern Ocean, where the charts showed only emptiness and guesswork about the coastline. For the first 4 hours, we sailed smoothly, the water gray and calm, with only long swells rolling in from the south, lifting the bow and lowering the stern in a steady rhythm. By evening, we had passed the last rocks of Macquarie, where seals lay on the rocks in masses and petrels circled above the water, diving for small fish. On one of the capes, I noticed a figure, an old man standing on the edge of a cliff, holding a staff and looking at us. As we passed by, he slowly raised his hand, not in greeting, but as if in warning. I recognized him. The day before, he had been sitting in a port tavern, drinking rum and telling stories to the whalers who were preparing their ships. He spoke slowly, with a Scottish accent that made every word heavier. If you see a red light in the water when the sun is low, he said, turn the ship around and pray. Where the bloody glow shines, the ice ghost rises from the abyss. It doesn't hunt, the old man continued. It just takes. I saw 3 crews that didn't listen. None of them came back intact, and those who survived could no longer look at the ocean without trembling. He showed me a scar on his right arm, round, the size of a human head, the skin tight and white, as if burned by the cold. A suction mark, he said. Someone laughed then, but the laugh was nervous and short. The first 3 days passed without incident. The water was calm, the wind remained steady, and the temperature dropped gradually, degree by degree, as we moved south. We passed drifting ice fields, flat, white, with cracks that darkened like wounds. Icebergs stood in the distance, looking like castles or ruins, with smooth walls that reflected light at strange angles. Birds followed us, petrels, albatrosses, seagulls, screaming and diving for fish scraps thrown overboard. The captain steered the ship in a zigzag pattern, avoiding large ice masses but keeping a course southeast toward coordinates marked on the map as unexplored territory. Dr. Finch lowered thermometers into the water twice a day, recording the temperature to the nearest 1/10 of a degree. Henry Buxton took the coordinates with a sextant at noon when the sun was at its highest and entered the data in the ship's log. Johann watched the horizon from the bow, looking for whales, the only prey we were after. In the evenings, we gathered in the wardroom, where Peter Holmes served salted meat with crackers and hot tea with molasses. The air there was warm and humid from our breath, and a kerosene lamp swung from a hook, casting shadows on the bulkheads. Johann told stories about Greenland whales that broke harpoon boats like kindling. Patrick whistled Irish tunes. Jamie listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word. On the 4th day, the wind died down completely. The water became as smooth as glass, reflecting the sky with such precision that the horizon disappeared. We moved only with the current, slowly, the bow cutting through the surface without a sound. The air temperature remained around 0, but the sun shone around the clock, rising and setting in an arc, never disappearing behind the horizon. By evening that day, we had reached coordinates 64 degrees south latitude, 108 degrees east longitude. The water ahead was darkening, the depth was dropping sharply. The captain ordered the lead to be dropped. Samuel lowered the lead weight on a marked hemp rope. The line went down 300 feet, then stopped. He pulled up the weight. Particles of black silt stuck to the grease smeared on the bottom. The captain nodded, recorded the depth in the log, and ordered us to continue. An hour later, the line had gone down 600 feet and still hadn't reached the bottom. Another hour later, 900 feet, and the line was gone. We were above a deep-sea trench. The scene that unfolded before us silenced even Johann. 2 massive icebergs stood on either side of the passage, each as tall as a 5-story building. their white walls covered with vertical furrows where meltwater had flowed and frozen again. Between them lay a corridor of open water about a mile wide, black as pitch even in the bright light. The current pulled us toward it with a slow but relentless force. The captain said we would pass between the icebergs and come out on the other side, where the charts showed possible whaling grounds. Johann shook his head but did not argue. We raised the sails to maintain control and entered the passage. The water there was different, motionless, so cold that steam rose from the surface in a thin haze. The sounds changed. Voices echoed off the icy walls in a strange way, returning delayed and distorted. The birds did not follow us. I noticed it right away. There wasn't a single seagull or petrel behind the stern. The sky was empty. On the third day after entering the rift, I smelled something. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable when I went out on deck in the afternoon. The air carried something that did not belong here, sharp, like ozone after a thunderstorm, but with an undertone of fishy stench and ammonia. I took a deeper breath, trying to identify the source. The smell intensified for a second, then dissipated. Johann was standing at the rail, looking into the water. I asked if he could smell it. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the surface. He said that smell happens when a whale dies at depth and the gases rise. But we hadn't seen any whales for 2 days. By evening, the smell had become constant. It hung over the water in a thin layer, causing slight nausea when inhaled too deeply. Dr. Finch said it was probably the excretions of marine organisms decomposing in the cold water, but his voice sounded uncertain. Peter Holmes prepared dinner in the galley, but no one ate with appetite. The smell permeated everywhere, even inside the cabins, mixing with the smoke from the kerosene lamps. That night, while Lars Anderson was on watch, I lay in my bunk, unable to sleep. The hull creaked softly, rocking gently on the slight swell. Water dripped somewhere nearby, probably condensation on the bulkheads. The other sleepers' breathing was even and quiet. Then I heard a sound. It didn't come all at once, but grew gradually, as if something enormous were awakening beneath the water. A low rumble, so deep that I felt it in my bones rather than heard it with my ears. My chest tightened at the sound. It vibrated through the boards, through the water, through the air. The frequency was about 15 or 20 vibrations per second, too low for the human ear, but my body reacted to it. My heart beat faster. A metallic taste appeared in my mouth. I got up from my bunk. My hands trembled as I pulled on my jacket. Others were waking up too. Henry sat holding the edge of his bunk, his face pale in the dim light of the lamp. Johann was already standing by the door, listening. The sound lasted about 40 seconds, then stopped. The silence after it was absolute. I went out on deck. Lars was standing at the helm, his knuckles white on the wheel. He said the sound came from below, from the depths right under the keel. He said he felt the vibration through the boards under his feet. The captain came out of his cabin, buttoning his jacket. He asked what had happened. Lars told him. The captain listened silently, looking overboard, where the water was black and calm. Then he ordered the watch to be doubled. 2 on deck at all times, he said, and keep the torches ready. The sound repeated itself 2 hours later. This time I was on deck, standing by the foremast with William Brooks. The rumbling rose slowly from the depths, gathering strength. Now there were overtones in it. Not just one tone, but several, layered on top of each other like a church organ chord played in a huge space. Another sound was mixed in with the rumble, quieter but distinct. A slow inhale and exhale, as if colossal lungs were breathing somewhere deep below us. William grabbed my sleeve. His fingers squeezed until it hurt. His face was turned down toward the water. I followed his gaze. Something was glowing under the keel. The glow was faint, reddish, pulsing in time with the rumbling that could be felt in our bones. It was deep, 150 feet below the surface, blurred by the water but still discernible. The patch of light, perhaps 20 or 30 yards in diameter, moved slowly, following us. When the ship turned in the current, the glow also changed direction, remaining directly under the keel. The captain stood at the side of the ship, looking down. Johann approached and stood beside him. They spoke quietly in Norwegian. Johann pointed to the glow, then to the south, then shook his head. The captain did not respond. The glow lasted for about an hour, then began to fade. Not abruptly, gradually, like a dying lamp. 10 minutes later, it disappeared completely. The rumbling also stopped. Silence returned, complete and heavy. Only the creaking of the rigging and the splashing of water against the hull broke it. The captain ordered everyone to stay at their posts. He said that we would continue our course at dawn. Johann objected, saying that we should turn back now while whatever was beneath us had moved away. The captain shook his head. He said we had come to explore, and one strange glow was no reason to flee. Johann said nothing, but his face was stony. In the morning, when the sun was higher in the sky, we noticed tracks on a drifting ice floe 200 yards off the starboard side. The captain ordered the boat to be lowered. I sailed with Henry, Dr. Finch, and Johann. The water was freezing. The oars barely moved through it. The resistance was greater than usual, as if the water had become thicker. The ice floe was flat, about the size of a small house and 5 feet thick. We found dents on its surface. They were symmetrical, 6 in number, forming an almost perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. Each dent was round, 6 to 8 feet in diameter and about a foot deep. The edges were smooth, without cracks, as if the ice had not broken but had been pressed in by something heavy and soft at the same time. I put my hand on the edge of one dent. The ice there was colder than the surrounding surface. I measured it with a thermometer. The difference was 15 degrees. Dr. Finch knelt down and examined the mark with a magnifying glass. He said that the structure of the ice had changed. The crystals were smaller and denser, as if after extreme pressure and subsequent rapid freezing. Johann walked around the tracks, measuring the distance with his steps. He said quietly that such a pattern was left by suction cups. But suction cups 6 feet in size. No squid he knew of was that big. Henry wrote everything down in his notebook, sketching the location of the tracks. His hand trembled slightly and the ink was uneven. We returned to the ship in silence. The captain listened to our report, examining Henry's sketches. Then he ordered us to continue on course. The next day, the silence became absolute. There were no birds. We had noticed that earlier. But now other sounds had disappeared too. The lapping of water against the hull had ceased. The creaking of the rigging stopped, even when the wind filled the sails. The ice around us did not crack or groan. It lay silently, as if dead. Even our voices sounded muffled, as if the air had become denser and dampened the sound. I timed it with a stopwatch. The silence began at 11:43 a.m. and lasted 13 minutes. During that time, no one spoke. We just stood in our places, listening to the absence of sound. My chest tightened from the silence. It became difficult to breathe, as if the air was resisting entering my lungs. Then suddenly the sounds returned. The rigging creaked. Water hissed against the hull. Someone breathed a sigh of relief, but the relief did not last long. Jamie shouted from the bow. We ran over there. The ship's buoy was standing, pointing at the water ahead. There, between 2 icebergs, the water was boiling. Not from heat, but from movement. Something huge was surfacing, raising the water in bubbles and whirlpools. Killer whales threw themselves onto the ice floe, 3 at a time, slamming heavily onto the surface and remaining there, motionless. Several seals jumped out of the water near the ship, their muzzles bloody, their eyes wild with fear. Dr. Finch measured the water temperature. The thermometer read -2 degrees. He measured again, not believing it. The result was the same. In 20 minutes, the temperature had dropped 8 degrees. The hull jerked. The blow came from below, dull and heavy, lifting the bow a foot, then dropping it back down. I grabbed the shrouds to keep my balance. The rigging shook, the masts swayed. The blow was repeated, stronger, from the port side. The water foamed, rose in a wave, and spilled over the gunwale. The captain shouted the order to raise all sails. The sailors rushed to the rigging, choosing halyards. The sails filled, the ship tilted and picked up speed, but the current pulled us back toward the center of the fault. Through the water, I saw a shape. It moved under the keel, huge and blurred, barely discernible in the darkness. The contours were irregular, too long, too wide. Something stretched from the central mass, a multitude of appendages moving independently. The glow flared again, red and cold, illuminating the shape for a second. I saw part of a head, smooth, skull-like with no visible eyes. I saw something like an arm, long, with fingers that moved slowly. I saw a tentacle, thick as a mast, covered with rows of round spots that glowed from within. Then the shape sank deeper and disappeared. We sailed non-stop for 2 days. The sails were kept taut, the watch was not changed, and we slept in turns as best we could. The captain did not leave the helm, his eyes red from sleeplessness, his hands gripping the handle until they went numb. Johann stood at the bow with a whaling harpoon, loaded and ready. Dr. Finch recorded everything in the log with a trembling hand. The red glow followed us. It appeared at night when the sun was low on the horizon and moved under the keel, keeping pace with us. Sometimes it rose closer to the surface, and then you could make out details. A pulsation that rippled in waves, dark masses inside the light that shifted and changed. On the third night, we found the wreckage. They were drifting among the ice floes. Planks, barrels, a piece of sail. Henry fished out one plank with a boat hook. An inscription was still visible, burned into the wood with paint. Nordstjernen, Bergen, a Norwegian whaling ship that had disappeared 3 years ago. Johan stood silently, staring at the plank. Then he said quietly that he had known the captain of that ship. The planking was not broken. It looked as if it had been melted from the inside. The wood was covered with a layer of icy slime, transparent and viscous, which did not melt even in the sun. When I touched it with my finger, my skin immediately went numb, then began to burn with cold. Among the debris, we found a harpoon, 4 inches long, made of steel, with a rope that had broken 3 feet from the base. The harpoon was bent into a knot like wire, a steel rod capable of supporting a ton of weight, twisted as if it were soft wax. In places, the metal had a strange structure, crystalline, shiny, as if it had been frozen with liquid nitrogen. Dr. Finch took the harpoon to his cabin to study it. In the evening, he showed me his find, a gelatinous mass the size of a fist that had stuck to the harpoon shaft. It was transparent, with a faint bluish glow inside. Its temperature was -2 degrees, even though it had been lying in the warm cabin for an hour. When Finch touched it with a scalpel, the mass twitched, contracted, then relaxed again. He said he couldn't tell if it was an animal or a plant. The cell structure was unlike anything known. He said he wanted to preserve the sample in alcohol for further study. That night, Lars Anderson was standing watch at the bow. I was asleep in my bunk when I heard a splash, not loud, soft, as if something heavy had slowly entered the water. Then silence. I lay there listening. My heart was beating fast. There was no scream. Lars disappeared without a sound. When we ran out on deck, he was gone. The water at the side of the boat was calm. There were no signs of a struggle, no splashes on the deck. Only a wet trail stretching from where he had been standing to the gangway. The trail was strange, not from water, but from something more viscous, with the smell of ozone and fish. The captain ordered torches to be lowered on ropes to illuminate the water. We saw a body 200 yards from the ship. It was drifting motionless, face up. Henry and Patrick lowered the boat and rowed out to it. When they returned, their faces were pale. Lars lay in the boat, covered with a blanket. I helped lift the body onto the deck. He was frozen, completely. His skin had become glassy and transparent, like ice, with his muscles and bones showing through. His eyes were open, covered with frost around the edges and eyelids. His mouth was slightly open with frost on his lips. His clothes were stuck to his body, hardened. When I touched his hand, it was as hard as stone. Dr. Finch measured the body temperature with a mercury thermometer, -20 degrees. The air temperature was 0. He said quietly that such freezing was impossible under natural conditions. The body would have had to spend at least an hour in water at -40 degrees. But only 5 minutes had passed since Lars disappeared. There were marks on his torso, 3 round ones, each about a foot in diameter, arranged vertically. The skin in these areas was sucked in, as if suction cups had sucked out the flesh. Inside each mark, there were small puncture wounds forming a ring. We wrapped the body in tarpaulin and placed it in the hold. Boatswain Grace said a short prayer. His voice was trembling. The captain ordered us to continue on course. Johan approached him, speaking through clenched teeth. He said we needed to turn around immediately, that whatever was down there was no longer just watching. The captain replied that we were in open waters, surrounded by ice on all sides, and the only way out was forward to the north, where the charts showed a passage. The turn would take 2 days, and all that time we would be in the rift. Johan fell silent, but his hands clenched into fists. That same night, Boatswain Grace lowered the boat. I didn't see it. I only heard a splash, then screams. When I ran out on deck, the boat was already 50 yards from the ship, Grace rowing toward the spot where Lars's body was drifting. We shouted at him to come back. He didn't listen. The boat reached the body. Grace reached out and grabbed the edge of the tarpaulin. At that moment, the water beneath the boat began to foam. A red glow flashed brightly, illuminating everything around it. The boat jerked upward, then split in half like a splinter. The 2 halves drifted apart. Grace fell into the water. He screamed for a minute. His voice was high-pitched, desperate, interrupted by gurgling. Then the screams subsided. The water boiled again. The red glow pulsated, then faded. Silence returned. We found no bodies. We found no wreckage from the boat. Only reddish foam drifting on the surface and slowly dissipating. The storm came at dawn on the fourth day. The sky darkened within an hour. Clouds crept in from the south, heavy and low, almost touching the masts. The wind picked up to 25 knots, tearing at the sails, whistling in the rigging. The waves grew to 10 feet, crashing against the hull, flooding the deck with icy water. The temperature dropped to -5 degrees. Spray froze on the rigging, covering the tackle with a crust of ice. The captain ordered some of the sails to be taken down, leaving only the jib and mainsail at minimum. The ship was listing heavily, the mast swaying in an arc. I held on to the shrouds, my feet slipping on the wet deck. Henry Buxton climbed onto the foremast to secure the torn sail. He was 20 feet up when a wave engulfed the ship. But it wasn't just a wave. I saw a shape in the water, a huge, moving mass that rose with the water. A part of a body, transparent and glowing, as thick as the hull of the ship. The wave hit the side, spilled over the gunwale, washing away everything in its path. Henry fell from the yardarm. I saw him fall into the water, his body suspended for a second on the surface, surrounded by a red glow. His arms twitched, reaching upward. Then he was pulled down, quickly, as if something had grabbed him from below and pulled him with force. The water boiled where he disappeared, then calmed down. The red glow sank deeper. We didn't try to look for him. The storm was getting worse, and the ship was barely staying on course. The captain stood at the helm with Johann, both leaning on the handle, keeping the bow against the wind. The storm lasted 6 hours. During that time, we traveled about 10 miles north, leaving the rift behind. The water was getting shallower. The depth gauge showed 800 feet, then 600, then 400. The icebergs were behind us, and ahead of us lay an ice field. Flat, endless, covered with snow. The captain ordered us to moor at the edge of the field and secure the ship with ice anchors. We had to walk across the ice, pulling the ship on ropes to get to the other side where the water was open again. Patrick O'Malley and John Turner were the first to step onto the ice, carrying ropes for securing the ship. I stood on the deck and watched. They walked about 50 yards, drove in the first ice hook, and began to unwind the second rope. The ice beneath them cracked. It didn't break, it melted. In seconds. I saw the surface change, become dark and wet, then collapse. Patrick managed to grab the edge, his fingers digging into the solid ice. John just disappeared under the water without even a cry. Patrick held on for 30 seconds. His fingers froze to the ice, his skin stuck to it. He screamed for help. Johann rushed to the boat, but the captain held him back. The water boiled with a red glow. Bubbles rose to the surface and burst with a quiet hiss. Patrick's body jerked downward, his fingers breaking away from the ice with a crunch, leaving his skin on the surface. John's body floated up next to him a few seconds later. We pulled them out with a gaff. Both were dead. Their faces were frozen in expressions of horror, their eyes wide open, their mouths contorted in a scream. Patrick had 3 round marks on his chest, just like Lars. John had a long gash on his neck, as if something had wrapped around it and squeezed. The bodies froze completely within a minute of us pulling them up. Dr. Finch didn't even try to take their temperature. The captain ordered the bodies to be left on deck. He said we would bury them later when we reached safe waters. Johann was silent, his face stony. That night, I woke up to a scream. Dr. Finch was screaming in his cabin. I jumped out of bed and ran there. The door was locked from the inside. I banged on it and shouted his name. The scream stopped. Johann ran up and rammed the door with his shoulder. The door cracked and came off its hinges. We burst inside. Dr. Finch was lying on the floor on his back, his arms spread out. Around him was a puddle of ice-cold water spreading across the floor. The sample he had kept in the jar was gone. The jar lay broken, shards of glass glistening in the lamplight. There were marks from suction cups on Finch's chest and face. 4 round marks, each about 6 inches in diameter, were located on his chest, neck, and right cheek. The skin in these areas was bluish and cold. His eyes were open, his pupils dilated. He was still breathing. Hoarsely, with difficulty, his lips moved, trying to say something. I leaned closer, pressed my ear to his mouth. "It's inside the ship," he croaked. His voice was quiet, gurgling. It penetrated through the boards. It was here. It touched me. His breathing stopped. His body twitched once, then went limp. Dr. Finch was dead. Johann measured the temperature in the cabin. 15 degrees Celsius. Body temperature, -10. He looked at me, his eyes wide. He said quietly that this was impossible, that a person cannot freeze from the inside at room temperature. But the body was cold. When I touched Finch's hand, the skin was like ice. His fingers wouldn't bend. We carried the body out onto the deck and laid it next to the others. 5 dead now. Half the crew. The captain gathered us all together, the 9 of us who remained. We stood in a circle by the mainmast, the wind buffeting our clothes. He said we had 2 options. The first was to continue north, to try to get out of the ice field into open water, which the chart showed was 100 miles away. The second was to stay here, wait, and hope we would meet another ship. Johann said there was a third option: split up. Part of the crew would take the boats to the nearest land, which the chart showed to be 80 miles to the north. The rest would stay on the ship, keep it in place, and wait for help. The captain shook his head. He said the boats wouldn't make it. Too cold, too far. But if anyone wanted to try, he wouldn't stop them. Charles Robinson said he would go in a boat. Samuel Davis, Peter Holmes, and William Brooks joined him. Jamie McAllister stood silently, then nodded. He would go too. I looked at the captain. He looked at me. He said it was up to me. I was young, I could try to walk, or stay and help hold the ship. I chose the boat. Johann stayed with the captain. 2 other sailors, Harold Smith and Edward Lewis, who had been quiet the whole time and whose names I had hardly mentioned, also stayed. We lowered 2 boats at dawn. We put a supply of biscuits, dried meat, water in barrels, blankets, torches, and a compass in each. The oars were prepared, and the oarlocks were greased with lard. The captain stood at the rail watching us. He said that if we made it, we should pass on the coordinates to the British Admiralty. Let them know what was here. Let other ships avoid this area. I nodded. My hands were shaking as I got into the boat. We pushed off. We started rowing. The last time I saw the Pelagia, it was a mile away. The ship was standing at the edge of the ice field, its masts black against the white ice. The captain was standing on the bridge, holding onto the railing. Johann was at the bow with a harpoon. Then I saw the water beneath the ship. It had changed. It had darkened. A red glow rose from the depths, bright and pulsating. The water foamed and boiled. Something enormous began to rise. The shape rose slowly, majestically. First I saw the head. Massive, skull-like, smooth, eyeless. About 20 feet tall, 10 feet wide, vertical grooves ran from the top down, glowing with a faint blue light. Then the shoulders appeared. Broad, disproportionate, with protruding structures resembling shoulder blades. The torso rose next. Transparent as ice, its internal organs were visible through it. A pulsating mass in the center, the size of a rowboat, beating every few seconds. A network of glowing channels through which a luminescent liquid flowed. Red, blue, green, pulsing in waves from the center to the edges. The torso was about 30 feet tall, 15 feet wide. The arms rose out of the water. 2 long limbs, each 15 feet long, thin but muscular. The fingers, 4 or 5 on each hand, long, 2 feet each, ending in black claws. The fingers moved slowly, smoothly, almost gracefully, as if conducting silent music. The tentacles followed the arms. There were many, 12, 15, maybe more, it was hard to count. They emerged from the sides, back, and shoulder blades, each as thick as a mast, 20 feet long, covered with rows of suction cups the size of a barrel. The suction cups glowed with a dim red light from within. The tentacles moved independently, writhing in the air, their ends pointed and shiny. The creature stood in the water, towering over the ship. It was about 50 feet tall from the surface of the water to the top of its head. Its body pulsed with light. Red, blue, cold white. Waves moving from the center to the periphery. It made no sound. Only the water splashed around it, flowing from its body in streams. The captain fired the harpoon gun. The harpoon entered the center of the creature's chest, where the glowing mass pulsated. The steel tip pierced the transparent skin, went deep, and the rope tightened. The creature did not flinch. It did not even slow down. Its head slowly tilted down toward the ship, as if examining a mosquito bite. Then it embraced the Pelagia. Its tentacles wrapped around the hull on all sides, softly, almost tenderly. The suction cups stuck to the plating, glowing brighter. Its arms rested on the masts, its fingers gripping the rigging. I saw ice instantly cover the wood where the creature touched it. The ship began to sink. Slowly, evenly, the bow went down first, then the stern. Water rose up the gunwale, flooding the deck. The masts tilted, the sails touched the water. The captain stood on the bridge, holding onto the railing, not moving. Johann was at the bow, still holding the harpoon. The Pelagia sank in 40 seconds. I saw the masts disappear last, sticking up vertically, then sliding down. The water boiled, a funnel formed, then the surface calmed down. The red glow lingered for another minute, pulsing in the depths. Then it began to fade, growing dimmer. 2 minutes later, it disappeared completely. The ocean was empty. No ships, no debris, no bodies, only ice and black water. We rowed. For 4 days, we rowed north, stopping for no more than an hour to sleep. Our hands bled from the oars. Our backs ached. Our lips were chapped from the cold and salt. We ate biscuits soaked in water, chewed dried meat, and drank a sip every hour, conserving our supplies. At night, we saw a glow, far away on the horizon, moving along the edge of the ice parallel to our course, red pulsating. It didn't come closer, it just followed as if seeing us off. Jamie cried the first night, quietly, trying not to show it. Charles sat next to him, put his hand on the cabin boy's shoulder and said nothing. On the 4th day, we saw a ship. It was the Norwegian whaling ship Fall 9 heading south. We shouted, waved, and rowed toward it with all our might. They saw us, drifted to a halt, and lowered a ladder. The ship's captain, Olaf Hansen, took us on board. He gave us hot tea, blankets, food. He asked what had happened. I told him everything, from beginning to end. He listened silently. When I finished, he looked at the others. They nodded in agreement. Olaf sighed and shook his head. He said he knew these waters, that whalers had long avoided the deep-sea trench area, that ships were lost there, and no one knew why. Now he said, we know. He turned the ship north toward New Zealand. He said he would not go south again this season. We arrived in Dunedin 2 weeks later. I wrote a report for the British Admiralty, attaching sketches, coordinates, and descriptions. The report was accepted, registered, and then nothing. No response, no expedition to investigate, no ban on sailing in the area. A year later, I learned that my report had been classified as the testimony of a shocked sailor and placed in the archives without further consideration. 15 years passed. Thomas Whitford, now 41 years old, sat at a table in a small house in Plymouth, far from the sea. Married with 2 children, a boy and a girl, sleeping upstairs. A job as a port clerk, paperwork, cargo records, no trips to sea. Every night, the same nightmare. A red glow under the water. A figure rising from the depths, arms embracing the ship. The captain standing on the bridge until the very end. In 1915, I began to write down the story. I wrote 20 pages, then burned the manuscript. Who would believe me? Who wouldn't think I was crazy? But the memory won't let go. The smell, ozone and fish stench. The sound, a low hum that could be felt in the bones. The sight, a transparent body pulsating with light. Johan Christensen returned to polar waters in 1909. He worked on whaling ships in the western Antarctic, far from that fault line. He told others about Titan, but they thought he was crazy, that his years at sea had damaged his mind. In 1911, his ship disappeared in the Weddell Sea. Among the debris washed ashore on South Georgia Island, his diary was found. The last entry, dated February 15th, saw a red light in the southeast. It is following us. It remembers. I'm sorry, old friend Thomas. You were right. We shouldn't have come back. Jamie McAllister spent 2 years in a mental hospital diagnosed with sea melancholy. After his discharge, he lived with his parents in Scotland, working on a farm far from the water. He was afraid of any water, even a well, even a stream. In 1920, he drowned in a 3-foot deep pond. Witnesses said he screamed before he died. It's in the water. It's everywhere. Charles Robinson emigrated to Australia immediately after his return. He changed his name to Charles Wilson and became a farmer in the interior of the continent, 300 miles from the nearest coast. He never told his family about his past. He died in 1942 at the age of 69. In his will, he left a strange request. Never transport my body by sea under any circumstances. Samuel Davis began drinking immediately after his return. He tried to live a normal life, but the sound haunted him. In 1908, he committed suicide. Note, I'm sorry, I can't hear that sound anymore. It haunts me even on land, even when it's quiet. The rumbling never stops. His wife reported that in his last months, he plugged his ears with wax and could only sleep when there were loud noises. Peter Holmes returned to work as a cook, but only on riverboats. He became obsessed with studying oceanography, spending all his savings on books and magazines. In 1913, he sent a letter to the Royal Geographical Society with a description of Titan, attaching sketches. The letter was dismissed as the fantasy of a mentally ill sailor. He died of pneumonia in 1928. His archive, including dozens of drawings of the creature and a map with marked areas of activity, was lost. William Brooks became an artist. All his paintings depicted one thing: the dark ocean and something huge under the water. His exhibitions were unsuccessful, with critics calling his work gloomy and morbid. In 1919, he disappeared while walking along the coast of Cornwall. His body was found a week later on the coastal rocks, his face peaceful. Next to him was an unfinished painting. It depicted a humanoid silhouette rising from the depths and a small human figure on the shore reaching out to it. As for me, I wrote down what I saw, although I know that few will accept it entirely. Still, I remember the sound most of all. A steady hum rising from the black water, a measure of something ancient that did not belong to our world but had settled in it. I remember the red glow pulsing in the depths. I remember the shape, huge, transparent, with arms and tentacles that embraced the ship like a mother embraces her child. Captain Holloway stood his ground until the end. Johann did not abandon him. They went down together, staying the course until the end. I wrote their names here so that someone would remember. Edward Holloway, captain. Johann Christensen, whaler. Henry Buxton, first mate. William Grace, boatswain. Alistair Finch, doctor. Lars Anderson, sailor. Patrick O'Malley, sailor. John Turner, sailor. The sea took them. The depths hold them. And what rose from that abyss is still there, in the waters of East Antarctica, at coordinates 64 degrees south latitude, 108 degrees east longitude. The charts show no warnings. The Admiralty has issued no ban. Ships still go there, searching for whales, exploring the depths.